Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement 2. On today's video, it's a little bit of a mystery. Okay, not really. I have an old monitor here that someone gave me, which I'm just getting here. And here it is. It's a Commodore 1084. I have no idea the condition of this monitor, if it works. Obviously, it's dirty. It's missing its front door. I love these particular monitors, so why don't I give this thing a little inspection and a test? And while I do that, I'll talk. We'll see how this goes. I am putting on gloves because, well, the monitor's dirty, and when monitors are heavily used on the inside, there's a lot of black soot and stuff, and I'd just rather keep that off my fingers. So yeah, the Boxy 1084. These are always made by Philips. And I actually really like these particular ones. Wow, I cannot see in here. They're sort of like the opening is wide enough for 2 screws. And, okay, there you go. There's a bunch of spider webs or like little, I don't know, what are they called? Like the little things with the nests, the eggs, I mean, in it, egg sacs. There's a bunch of egg sacs in there. I like these particular monitors. I think that's undone, because they're really flexible. These particular 1084s, I think, are the most flexible of all, in my opinion. Now, they're not the most stylish because they're really boxy, but they have very flexible inputs. Now, let's just take a quick look at that really quickly on the back of the monitor here. So this is a US model, obviously, so it doesn't have a SCART input, but some of them actually, well, I think it's possible to mod this to have the SCART input, but really having SCART doesn't like add any functionality that you don't otherwise have on this anyways. So there are two versions of this. There's one that has stereo speakers and one that's mono. This is the mono one. I don't really know like why some are stereo and some are mono, but you have video input, audio input, and then this top connector is the Luma input, or sorry, Chroma input. And when you push this switch here, it switches between just regular composite video and Luma Chroma, which is like what a Commodore 64 can output, which is why Commodore added it to this monitor. These were coming out before S-Video, that connector, which we're all used to, the little DIN connector, existed. And really, all that S-Video cable is Luma Chroma, and it's got 4 pins because it's got 2 grounds. And Commodore was doing it really early, 1982, with the Commodore 64. Well, actually, the very first 64 did not have Luma Chroma. But soon after that, the 1701 came out, that famous monitor that goes with the 64, and it had the same inputs. So Commodore really put the Luma Chroma on all their monitors for quite a long time. So what's the date on this? It says 1988, February 1988 is when this came out. So quite a bit after the 64, but fully compatible. Now, of course, the C128 also used Luma Chroma, as did the Atari 800 and those types, the 8-bit machines. In fact, the very first 800, I don't think, had Luma Chroma output on its DIN connector. You had to like do a mod, but maybe it did, and actually the mod is for the XL. I can't really remember. I'm not as well versed on Atari as I am on Commodore stuff. So anyways, back to this monitor. What I like about this is the RGB input on here are these 2 DIN connectors. Now, there are 2 connectors because one is TTL and one is analog. But the nice thing about the analog input on this monitor, unlike all the other 1084s, is it has RGB input, like the signals are R, G, and B, but also horizontal and vertical sync signals. There's 2 separate pins on this connector. Now, the interesting thing is inside the monitor, when you look at the schematics, the monitor just combines the 2 sync signals. Then they kind of go through some traces, and then they get split again because, I mean, a CRT needs horizontal and vertical sync to be separate. I mean, obviously, there are separate parts of the circuitry in here that handle horizontal and then another separate part for vertical. So I don't know why this has 2 pins for the input and then it recombines it. The side effect is that you can feed this thing horizontal plus vertical sync on the analog input, or you could just feed composite sync into either one of the two inputs, you know, the horizontal or vertical, and it totally works perfectly. So computers like the Apple II GS, which has a composite sync, work perfectly with this monitor. Computers that only have horizontal and vertical sync, like the Atari ST, the earlier ones, work perfectly with this monitor as well. The Coco 3 is composite sync. That works perfectly with this. The Amiga has both types of sync on its video connector, the 23 pin, so it would work either way. But it's just the most flexible that I found. All the other 1084s, like the earlier ones, the one that came out with the Amiga 1000, and the later ones that were like with the Amiga 4000s and stuff, those only have composite sync on the analog input. Now, the other thing is that the TTL input is a separate jack on here. Now, while these are DINs, you can't just plug in a DB9, you know, a regular 9-pin connector, like a CGA cable. The connectors aren't rare. You just find them online real easily. And I just make little pigtails to plug in here, and then it has a 9-pin, just a standard DB9. So I can plug in a CGA cable or a cable for an Amiga that comes from one of the other computers. In fact, I use the DB9 as like my standard interconnect. So I have adapters for this monitor, and then I can go from that to like the 2GS or the Atari ST or the Amiga or whatever. I sort of use that as the interchange. But it's kind of nice that there's two separate jacks. I don't know what happens if you try to run both at the same time, but there's no switch on this monitor. It's like you use one or you use the other. I think I would probably mix if you try to use both, and that would not be a good thing. But I mean, it would just cause, you know, a corrupted image. But ultimately, it like totally works fine with either one, and it's really good. So the TTL input, of course, is CGA standard, so Commodore 128 or IBM PC or Tandy 1000, all of those work perfectly. There are controls on the back of this monitor here for horizontal size, vertical size, and that's external. That's rare. I think the earlier 1084s, a lot of these types of controls, I don't remember the exact which ones are which, but they're like through holes in the back of the case. You gotta like use a screwdriver to adjust them. These are just accessible right here. There's a button for VCR. It's got something to do with the composite input. I honestly never noticed a difference with this. The manual just says push it if you're using a VCR. It goes to like the sync decoder chip. Who knows? If anyone knows what that is, let me know. But I really like how the controls are on the back here. And I like this button is, like I said, it switches between composite and the S-Video mode or Chroma Luma. And the nice thing is if you put it on Chroma Luma and you only hook up the composite, you just get a black and white image, but you get a really sharp black and white image, because turning on the Chroma Luma disables a lot of the notch filtering that's going on this composite monitor here in North America at least. So even a monochrome signal through the composite input, like from an Apple II, will be kind of soft. But when you push this button, it's now really sharp. And this can display 80-column text without any issue, things like that, when you have that button pushed. It'd be nice if that button was on the front, but it is on the back here. So that's how it is. The case is painted on this thing, and that means it doesn't yellow. So that's a benefit. Let's see if I got this one screw out. I really want to look inside here. But it does mean it can get scratched up if it's banged around a lot or whatever. Oh, it's like crap on there. And the other thing is the front door, the little door on the front of it, is always broken. It's super common. This one is just missing entirely. The plastic's kind of brittle on this monitor. I feel like if it got dropped, it would completely shatter. Like the case is often creaky. Like even right here sitting like this, it's just kind of, there is a little thing here to hold the power cord. It's like a little clip thing here. Let me turn the monitor, maybe I can show it. It sort of wraps around here. This always breaks. In fact, I'm sure this is gonna break right now. Okay, it didn't. You gotta unwrap the cord though to take the back cover off. But it's just this little hook here. It keeps the cord from getting squished by the foot or whatever that's on here. The plastic does yellow, and the unpainted part, which is what's under here, is actually yellowing it. So if the monitor weren't painted, yeah, it would be pretty yellow. Underneath here, I swear there's provisions for a tilt swivel stand, but I've never seen that, ever. It does have like a kickstand here on the front that would prop the monitor up. But you see this round part here? Definitely a tilt swivel stand could be attached to the bottom of this. I just never seen that. So if anyone knows like that exists, actually made by Philips. I'd love to see a picture of that. I mean, they released a lot of these monitors in this exact same case. For instance, Magnavox here in the US, which is just a brand that Philips owned. There's a missing screw right here. That is interesting. So what, someone has been inside this thing, and actually this foot's broken off here. There should be a little foot that's broken. I can't believe the screw is gone. There are normally 5 screws, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom that I was just taking out, and then there's one right here, which is a little bit smaller. This just goes onto the audio video jacks here. Actually, it's not smaller, and it's kind of stuck. So you gotta take this one out as well. It sort of holds those RCA jacks in place. Anyways, Philips released a lot of versions of this. So this is obviously an OEM for Commodore, but it's made by Philips. But they made their own branded ones that look just like this. I forgot the model number, but I think it was more common in Europe than the US. But in the US, Magnavox was their brand, their like house brand or whatever. And they sold plenty of monitors that look just like this as well under the Magnavox brand. There's quite a bit of a difference from one to another. Like the Magnavox ones, I think they're all color, obviously. But there were some, well, actually, there are monochrome versions of this. They're smaller. They look similar styling. It's a totally different monitor, but same look as this, just smaller. But anyways, from a color perspective, they are, the Magnavoxes, there's like a Magnavox Color 40, and it's really low resolution. I mean, it's just designed to be a kind of a composite monitor, right? No, wait a second. I think I took out both screws on the bottom. I was accusing someone of having opened it. There's still one in the top there. And over here, there are 4 of the case screws sitting there. I don't think I unscrewed this one all the way. Let me get this out of here and stop talking so much. Make sure the camera is framed. Let's get this off. Oh, oops, there goes the screw that was in the top. All right, so the speaker's connected. You gotta unplug this. All the usual warnings apply, right? Working inside a CRT, be careful. High voltages, danger, danger, Will Robinson. You could die potentially if you do the wrong thing in here. So please make sure you do not work inside a CRT unless you know what you're doing. And if you don't, then leave it to the experts. So yeah, like as I was saying, the Magnavox monitor of this style is basically really low res, the Magnavox 40. It's like a color monitor. It doesn't have Luma, Chroma. It doesn't have RGB. But they did sell an RGB version, like it's called something else. And then they sold like one with a higher res CRT, that's called something else. All the Commodore 1084s in this form factor have a pretty nice high resolution CRT. There's also like a 1920, or is it 1902? Also looks just like this. That one is, I think it's basically the same monitor almost. Maybe it doesn't have the analog RGB, it only has digital, I don't know. I think it's designed for the C128. So I think that's why it's Luma Chroma video for the C128 and the digital, which is used on like the 80 column mode. Either way, like there's just a lot of them. And I think most of the parts are relatively interchangeable, but there are differences from one CRT to another. And the low res CRTs, like on the Magnavox, has a different connector on the back here. So you can't put that into this monitor because this board won't fit on there. This is a high res CRT. It displays 80 column text really well. Because if you think about the Amiga, it's pretty high res, and CGA text, no problem. It's not like the highest resolution, and maybe the 1902 is better, I don't know. But compared to like an actual full-on CGA monitor from, say, IBM, that monitor is really crisp and sharp. This thing I don't think is quite as good. But this thing is so versatile with all these inputs, that's why I really, really love it. Okay, so taking a look at this thing, and I didn't turn this on, right? This is just the way it looked when I got it. Here's the power cord, just really dirty. Inside, it is dirty. This indicates to me that this monitor had a lot of use, and I mean a lot. The back case on this monitor, the way the vents are, if dirt falls on the top of the monitor, say it's stored like in the garage and it's just really, really dirty, it's gonna land on the case. It's not gonna go inside the monitor. When monitors have vents that are open to like what's above it, yeah, like the dirt will just fall straight down. This monitor doesn't really happen. There's a little bit where it is, but most of it is closed up. So all this dirt you see in here, and like, see the high voltage cable here is like so, it should be bright red, and it's like this dull brown color, and everything here just is super, super dusty. When the monitor is running, and you like see it looks like a lot of dirt to be honest, but when a monitor is running, the high voltage parts, which are like the flyback and the monitor here, the CRT, it just attracts, it has like a lot of like static electricity, sort of. It attracts this kind of black sooty dust that gets on everything. So usually it's all around like the anode cap here, and it's darker than normal just house dust, for instance. But let's just, let me do a quick visual inspection here. So things look okay, like the flyback is not cracked or damaged. Zoomed up the camera a little bit. I don't see anything wrong on the flyback, like no obvious signs of, like sometimes they can overheat and they bulge, and of course then they don't work anymore at that point. I'm pretty sure for this monitor, there are replacement flybacks available. Like, I don't know if they're original Philips, but someone makes, or has figured out the right part number, maybe from a Chinese manufacturer. So apparently there are some available. I'd say in a monitor like this, or in pretty much any monitor, things that are gonna fail is obviously the CRT. I've talked about this. This is a big vacuum tube, basically. I mean, imagine a tube inside an old radio or something. The CRTs, just like regular vacuum tubes, wear out. The more you use them, they just get worn. They have a finite lifespan. And there are two components to that. There's the phosphor that gets dim over time, just like a fluorescent light. It's phosphor that's excited by what's happening inside a light, the light bulb, the UV there that's generated, and that dims over time. And usually with the fluorescent light, when you see them, they flickering and they're failed. Well, that's potentially some other problem. Like there's not enough mercury in there, or some of the gases have like worn out or leaked. But when the bulb's made really well, they just get dim over time. And yeah, if you look online, like you read articles about it, just the number of hours you use them, the dimmer they get. So that's the phosphor. But there's another component that wears out on the CRT, and that's what's in the neck here. This is where the emissions are coming from, the cathodes basically, that are generating electrons that fly toward the front. Those wear out as well, and they just don't generate as many emissions anymore. And that part of the tube, and I mean, when you look at it here, it just looks like a regular vacuum tube right there. Like imagine the rest of the CRT is not there. This is just like a vacuum tube. Like it's all underneath these convergence rings here. Just the only difference is there's this big bulb thing attached to it here, and it shoots the beam, and then the deflection yoke bends the beam around. So they wear out. So on a CRT like this, obviously if the CRT is worn out, or as it wears out, it gets dim or it gets blurry. There's all sorts of different failures you can have. So that can happen, and then obviously that makes the monitor kind of useless. But if the flyback transformer dies, which is also a really common part, because I don't know what the working voltage is of the CRT, but it's like 20,000 volts maybe on this monitor, 23,000 maybe. And there's insulation and windings and stuff. It's a transformer, just like any other transformer. And that high voltage and that heat that's generated breaks down over time, and could be manufacturing defects or who knows, whatever. And if those, there starts to be breakdown inside there, you get arcing and you get all sorts of issues, and then it can melt down, and or you can have shorts in there, and the whole monitor's not going to work anymore at that point. The flyback transformer doesn't just generate the high voltage, it generates all the other voltages that a TV uses, or that a monitor uses, or any TV as well. So it has to work. Like, you gotta have a working flyback for the whole monitor to work pretty much at all. This thing has a power supply on it, so maybe the audio would work without the rest of the monitor working. But certainly on some devices, like some TVs for instance, the flyback does everything. Like it's all the various voltages of the TV are generated from the flyback. So those are the two main things. I really wanted to just look in here, see if any of the caps look obviously bulged, leaky, damaged, or whatever. Look for any other signs of damage or anything obviously wrong. I am not seeing that. Obviously there's a lot of dirt in here. So as I said, I think this thing is like very high hour. the power supply on this is this board right here, this one on the side. Sorry, you can't really see it. That board. So that could have a problem. This thing is like an isolated design, meaning it has like a switching power supply basically. It's not a live chassis, and I've talked about that with some of the TVs. Live chassis means that you're relying on the neutral pin on your plug to be actually neutral, and you know your house plug has to be wired correctly. And if you plug it in backwards, then the ground or the chassis ground inside the set is now going to be live at mains voltage. So that's dangerous, clearly. And it's very difficult when you have things like video input or RGB, because this stuff's all grounded to computers that are plugged in that are also going to be plugged into earth ground and everything. So you can't have a live chassis, because if the wiring was wrong in your plug and this stuff was now at mains voltage and you plug your computer into it, not only could you get a shock touching this stuff, but of course it would create a short circuit or who knows what, and you blow things up. It'd be really bad. So yeah, isolated power supply. So if this thing doesn't turn on, then could well be the power supply here that's a problem. That would be like if the monitor appears totally dead. But if it kind of works, then there might be a problem with the flyback. Because remember, like if the power light comes on, I don't think that's generated from the flyback. I think the audio and the power light are just from the power supply. So if the rest of the monitor appears dead, then it's something wrong, with the monitor itself on this side, meaning there is no horizontal deflection, which is needed for all the other voltages to exist. And anyways, I'm just talking about theoretical possibilities with this monitor. Another interesting thing is there's a little board right here. I don't know if it's visible. It's a shielded little board that's sticking up from the main PCB. That is the board that converts the digital RGB from like CGA into analog. Because of course the CRT works in a completely analog fashion, right? There's no digital going on in here. So the first thing that happens once you plug in a digital RGB signal is it goes through this little board on this monitor that does convert it, back down to the analog RGB, very much like this. That board could be external. It doesn't need to be inside the monitor. I was thinking theoretically, if this monitor is like totally dead, maybe I could take that board out and like make a little external box that could just convert from CGA to analog. But who knows? I don't know. The voltage levels it generates might be, particular, because I don't know where it is in the circuit on this monitor. A little funny tidbit about this particular 1084, this exact Philips one, not this exact monitor, but yeah, this style, the very early ones, that board, this little analog board, actually has two modes that it works in. One is it decodes CGA colors from digital to analog. And remember, CGA has that, like, instead of dark yellow, it has a brown color. So it's like a weird exception that little board has to handle. The early versions of this had two RGB modes for the TTL, CGA, which did the correct conversion, and Apple XRGB. What's that, you ask? Well, the Apple III has RGB on it. Apple actually sold an RGB card for the Apple IIe as well. And it's digital TTL. It's not analog like 2GS, it's digital. And the color mapping, like with, it's the same RGB bits, and then there's an extra bit for like intensity on CGA, so it's like 4 bits basically. The color mapping is totally different. And when you look in the service manual for this, it shows you that early version of this monitor and both decoding modes basically. And I can't remember how you switch. I think there's an extra pin on the connector here, like you ground it, and then it will decode the Apple colors, which matches all the color palette used on the original Apple IIs, all those 16 colors that it has on the original low res mode, and then high res has 6 colors, right? White, black, and then purple, green, this is coming out of memory here, cyan and orange, right? The way those colors look is not the same as CGA. So if you put an Apple RGB into this monitor, and if it doesn't support that, it'll work. You can see an image, but the colors are going to be all weird. The white will be fine, the black will be fine, but all the other colors will just look weird and not right at all. So yeah, that board has that capability. I don't think this is one of those monitors, because I think the one that can do both is like from 1986 or so, and this is from 88. But just interesting little tidbit there. And I don't think externally there's really a way to tell which is which. In fact, all the ones I've ever seen of this style have never been the one that could do both. Okay, I've talked long enough. I'm just gonna do a quick inspection here and look for bad caps, just visually, and then we'll plug this in. All right, yeah, everything looks okay. I don't see anything that leaks or looks obviously out of sorts in here. I can be confident to say that no one has ever been inside of this monitor before either. I mean, if they were, it was when it was new or newish, because all this filth and dirt in here has definitely, you know, been like this forever. Let's unwrap this power cord. And while I do, by the way, the little board here that converts from digital to analog, the way it works is extremely simple. It just uses a bunch of resistors and some diodes and whatever to create like a very primitive digital to analog converter. It's got obviously transistors on there and a couple logic ICs for buffering and stuff like that. And that's it. That's all you really need. Let me make sure the monitor is off. Is the power switch working? Yes, it is. That's good. You know, it's funny. A lot of 1084s, especially the ones after this, the ones for the Amiga 4000, I think 3000, where the power switch is on the back, those power switches fail constantly. For whatever reason, Philips, who also made that later monitor, whatever switch they're using on these seems to be reliable. I'll just make sure this is off. I'll plug this in. Oh, okay, I thought it was off, and it's actually on. But it turned on, and no sparks came out. No noises, you know, I can tell it's running. I see the filament running. I hear the high voltage, and I can hear the 15 kilohertz. I used to be able to hear that much more clearly than I can now in my 40s, but I still can hear it. So that's good. At least I'm not totally deaf. Let's turn this off. There we go. It's actually off now. All right, well, that's a great sign that the monitor turned on. So I'm going to turn this towards the camera here. See, this is why I'm wearing gloves. Filthy, filthy hands. And let's turn this back on. So we got a working power LED. That's good. I had one of these once where the power LED didn't work, nor the sound, and there was a burned up resistor on the board. Okay, time to plug it into the signal generator. All right, I have this RCA cable here connected up to my test pattern generator. You could obviously input anything into this, like a Commodore 64 or whatever you got around, VCR, but I like to use this because I like to see the color bars. When you first turn on a monitor like this that you haven't used in a long time, or you know hasn't been used in a long time, what you need to, oh, I might have it connected, oh, let's see here. Okay, it's black and white. It's black and white because on the test generator, it's got a couple outputs for S-video and stuff like that. I will get another cable. All right, actually, never mind. I moved the connector on the back of the signal generator. I think we should be getting a color signal. There it is. Okay, I'm kind of shocked. This has quite a nice picture right off the bat. Wow, let's just, all right, the controls are dirty as is expected. Okay, that's color. Yeah, this looks really good. I'd say like the color balances out just slightly, and that means like if we input a monochrome signal like that, it's going to be impossible to tell on the camera, but the white, what is white, is kind of a slightly greenish, like I would say on here, which means that the blue, like if you think of the red, green, blue guns, the blue one is a little weak, which, you know, and as these age, there are 3 different cathodes generating electron beams, right, for each of the colors, and they age at different rates because they're used at different amounts depending on what, you know, content you're showing. Like maybe this was always showing a Commodore 64 and the blue wore out. I mean, I don't think that has anything to do with it, but you know, it's possible, right? But the blue, it's pretty good, but it just needs to be turned up ever so slightly. Now I have other videos about that, and you do it on the neck board. But wow, right off the bat, I mean, it's sharp, it looks good. I don't see any blurriness, any blooming. When you first turn on a monitor that hasn't been used in a long time, that's what I was just trying to say when I went to go plug it in, you want to listen for weird noises like strange, high-pitched, loud, high-pitched noises that indicate that the monitor's not working. Like if there's a short and flyback, you might have like a really loud whine. If a flyback is dying or something else is wrong, you might have arcing. So if you hear snapping noises, Like if you could imagine like sparks, but inside there, and not the quiet little staticky sparks you might hear, you know, from the screen. That's normal. I'm talking about like loud snaps, like tsh. And then what happens a lot of times if the flyback is arcing is the CRT, you'll kind of lose some of the high voltage. Basically it's used up for the arc. It doesn't go into the picture tube. It's used up to make the arc. And the picture will often like shrink a little bit and get dim for a split second, and then it comes back. I mean, it's kind of like if I turn the monitor off and on here. Okay, let's see, the power switch doesn't work that well. Okay, that it does, it's fine. See how it doesn't come on like instantly, it kind of comes up? That's because, you know, the high voltage has been bled away and it needs to come back. I'm kind of shocked. This thing is working well. So this is the RGB composite switch on the front. And like I said, on the back is between S-Video or Luma Chroma and composite. That looks good. This monitor has volume control right here. It has a sharpness control. It's got color control. Because this is an NTSC monitor, of course it has a hue control. PAL monitors won't have this because PAL, the way it works is the color is actually set. It's like in the signal itself. It's phase alternating lines, right? It's just the way it works. So that's why people say NTSC is, you know, never the same color twice, because it does have this control. I'm just, not to defend NTSC as like being good or anything, you know, it was designed in the 50s. It's really, really old. RCA made color TV way before anyone else, and it was in use in the US before anywhere else as well. Well, I mean, I don't know, in test markets, but I mean, you know, in wide scale use, like people had color TVs in the 50s here, tube ones. And yes, they were affected by the tint, the phase is shifting and the color like not looking right and stuff like that. So you needed to fiddle with your tint control, I'm sure, on those sets. But everything like from this era, like you certainly don't, and anything newer, of course. Yeah, but that's the contrast, obviously. We got brightness there, or I don't know which is which. There's little symbols. And there is the color. Now, if I push the button in the back, you see how there's this pattern that appears? That is actually these dots, which I don't know how well they're coming across in the camera, but these dots are the color signal in NTSC. It's overlaid on top of the luminance signal. That's what composite video is. And that's the same as when it's over the air. So the TV, or the monitor in this case, is decoding those dots, and that's what's generating the color. If I turn the color back up, there it is. Now, the reason why these colors look solid here is because there is a filter on the circuit board that removes those dots, like a notch filter. So it's like cutting that part of the signal out. And that's why composite is usually very blurry. It's just not high resolution because, you know, you're filtering out these dots, which are at like around 3.5 megahertz or so. Now, later they had comb filters and much more advanced ways of decoding the color, and, you know, you got better, sharper images, but this doesn't have any of that. So when I push that button, it removes the filter. It also removes the color because it wants it through that separate jack. But that's why you see these dots here. If I plug it into the back of the signal generator into the Luma output for the Luma Chroma, like that's video, then these will be solid. And then the color is applied on top of that through the other cable. But that is what you're seeing. But when I turn down the color here, oops, there we go, you don't really see dots. You see them here between the transitions, which is normal. But in the middle of these color bars, you just sort of see gray. And when I push the button, the dots appear. Now some of that could be sharpness. Okay, I turned the sharpness all the way down, so there we go. So the dots are still there, but notice it's a lot more reduced when I have it set to composite color mode, and that's the filter in play. But in S-Video or Chroma Luma, you get far more sharpness. This is the same on a Commodore 1702 monitor, but the difference on that is that a 1702 has a low resolution CRT. It's just like the dot pitch. Remember, if you heard about dot pitch on the VGA days, those are like how close together the RGB, I'm not going to call them sub-pixels, but like the little phosphor dots on here, because a CRT doesn't have pixels. This has a much higher dot pitch, so that means those little RGB spots on the screen are much smaller and closer together, which means this CRT has a higher resolving power for fine detail than a 1702. The trade-off is you don't get as much vibrancy and brightness out of this CRT because more of it is blocked by the shadow mask than a 1702. So that gets a nice, bright, vibrant picture, but it's low resolution. So it's fine for the 64, but even if you input 80 column text through that Chroma Luma input on the 1702, it's not gonna be that sharp. But on this, it is, when you push the button, that is. It looks good. So anyways, let's see what other test patterns we have here. Okay, so that's just the regular old Convergence one, and let's see, there's a bit of misconvergence up here. It's good in the rest. So the white line, of course, is made with the red, green, and blue electrons, right? And they're slightly out of alignment. The red is down below and the blue is above. It's only in the corner. This monitor was almost certainly like this from new. I doubt this happened later in life. Like, it doesn't look like this monitor suffered any trauma that would have caused that. Dropping it and, like, you know, banging it can knock it out a little bit because of there's little things back here to help it all align. Yeah, typically, if you move this, let's see if I can affect this. It's not even going to show up in the camera. There are these little like wedges. Let me turn the monitor. The yoke here, obviously, is what's controlling the electron beam. And there are these wedges here that position the yoke in the right spot. And they're glued and taped in place so they don't fall out. And that's why I think like this has been like this since new. Typically, if you like bend and move the deflection yoke around, like it's just plastic, right? That'll affect the convergence in the corners. These controls here, this is called static convergence, if I recall. Those affect like the entire image together, but if you're just trying to affect like what's in one corner or one part of the screen, I think that's these wedges and stuff like that. And there might be little magnets as well taped under there. Like I don't see any here, but sometimes there's a little magnet taped on the screen, and that is also to correct those types of issues. I mean, this monitor is dirty, but really it works quite well. I'd say that this convergence problem is a little annoying, and that if you tried to display like CGA text, you'd see that in this part of the screen right here. But most of the time with like a computer display in Western languages, right? Like the characters, you always start their line on this side. So you really want the convergence to be good over here, because that's where you're going to be, you're looking at your DOS prompt most of the time or whatever, you know, ready prompt on a 64. And this part of the screen is just used less. So it's not the end of the world, but yeah, it's a bit out. It's out on the whole side. It's really bad right here. It's really good in this part. Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, I'm shocked. It really looks good. Let's see what else I got here. So this here is for color purity testing. As CRT ages, or if the deflection yoke was in the wrong spot, like fore and aft, you know, if this is the back of the CRT and it's right here, you know, you can move it back toward the back of the monitor. That will affect the beam landing. You'll get like splotches in the corners, or there could be magnetism, or the degaussing coil might not be working. That looks good. It's typically very visible on the red to see if there's like green or blue splotches, and there are none. So that's excellent. Green, usually if red looks good, then these other colors are going to look good as well. Blue is fine as well, obviously. Let's look at a white, or this is a gray field. So here I'm just looking for like any kind of issues. Obviously the screen's really dirty. Looks good. I mean, you might see like some darker spots, and that would be convergence issues usually, but it looks fine. Typically that's, yeah. I don't know, that all looks good. This particular test pattern here, which has this rainbow effect, if I push the switch on the back, it goes away, right? This is basically like a chroma luma interference pattern that this generator generates, and it's just, you're supposed to validate that it looks correct. Ramps. This particular test here tests the power supply. So very bright and very dark parts of the screen, when they're changing, you could have issues with the geometry. When you have a bright part of the screen, it takes more current to drive the beam, right? Because it's pushing all this light, you know, which are electrons, and that can drain the power supply. And when that happens, you could have the picture expand or shrink, depends on the design of the monitor. this particular Philips monitor, you know, this design is pretty robust, where normal brightness picture doesn't cause geometry issues in the white square here. Cheaper monitors, or ones that are very worn out, where you have to turn the knobs up and to push the CRT to make it bright enough to use, then you start to have bulging typically, where it expands when you have the overdriven part. Let me turn it all up here and see if we can make it happen. Nope, it doesn't do it. This thing is good, yeah. Power supply is good in this monitor. I mean, whether these caps are all old and outdated, or you know, not working well, I'm sure that's the case. But this image is perfect. I mean, I don't see any flaws at all. The gray one really can show, like sometimes you have this rippling effect over here that comes from like some bad caps in there. Not happening at all. Everything looks really good. I am like the power supply looks good. This is a resolution test. See this color over here? This is because these lines get closer and closer together, and over here they're so close together that it's basically turning on and activating the color decoding circuit on the NTSC part of the monitor. When I push the button though, now I see clearly defined lines, all of these, and that's because that filter's turned off, as is the color decoding. But yeah, like if I hooked it up a monochrome monitor, these would be even clearer over here. But on a color monitor like this, they're still clear enough that you could see 80 columns. And the last one on my generator is, oh, there's this one here, which is like a kind of a combo of everything. You know, the color bars, there's the resolution test, there's the interference pattern, gray. So yeah, there we go. And there's one more called bounce. Oops, there we go, which just alternates between a black and a white image. And you can see there's a little bit of something on the edge here. But this is a very stressful test for this monitor, for any monitor that is, and this is working well. I am not seeing a single issue. One other thing to consider when you're looking at this particular test pattern here. So down here on this part of the NTSC color bars, this is what you're seeing here, there's actually like three, in the black area here, there's like this black, that black, and that black. This middle bar is the same as these two. I don't even know how visible this is on the camera. That's blacker than black, this one here. The way you want to adjust the brightness in NTSC land is you want it where you can just see this bar. So the one that's darker, blacker than black, you don't want to even see it. But this here, this part of the black here in this area, you shouldn't really, when the lights are off, you shouldn't really see any gray in that area. But you do want to see this part. And that's setting that bottom of the picture, that black level. And then the contrast is actually more like a picture level. That's like how bright the picture gets. So the brightness sets the minimum here, controls around the black area, and then the picture control, or the contrast, it's called picture on Sony's, but contrast on everything else, adjusts the white level, how bright the white is. So it's a misnomer that brightness, it does control everything on the screen, it affects everything, but ultimately use brightness control to set the black level. So you're not seeing a bunch of grayness. And when I turn this up, you see how like now it's all gray and washed out. The whole picture looks washed out. That's because the black level is too high, and that's the brightness knob. So yeah, there we go. I can just see it right there. So anyhow, yes, thumbs up. A working Commodore 1084, and I did a lot of talking. So what does the camera say? 48 minutes. We'll see how long this is when I edit it, because I'll probably cut some of that out. But if you enjoyed this very long format, me talking about monitors, then thumbs up. If you didn't, feel free to put a comment and say what you didn't like. What I just did here is just the normal stuff that I do when I get a monitor like this. This monitor was saved from e-waste, as are a lot of things on the channel. And, you know, I have no idea if it works. I just get it, and it's totally unknown. It could have been e-wasted because it was broken. Clearly, this thing is not broken, and it was just sitting in someone's basement/garage. It's not damp or musty smelling at all. So I'm going to say this was somewhere that wasn't damp, but it's dirty. I was probably there for like 20 years, you know, since they got rid of their Amiga or Commodore 64 or whatever. And now I have it. So I'm going to clean this up and then I'll figure out what to do with it. So yeah, if you like this, thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. And hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I have a merch store now, which there'll be a link in the description. I can't believe I launched a merch store. So yeah, check that out if you are interested in merch, t-shirts and stuff at this point, and maybe other stuff by the time you see this video. And I guess that's that. So yeah, thanks to my patrons. Their names are going up the side here. If you want to become a patron, you can do so at the link in the description. There will be patrons get to see videos before they are released. And I also, for the higher tiers, post random stuff like a tour of part of my basement and other interesting stuff. So if you like that, that's one of the benefits. So there we go. Thanks very much for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye. We'll just turn this off. Oh, power switch is a little sticky. Usually a little lubrication in there fixes that.